Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Doomer Optimism podcast. Today, we have an old internet friend, well, at least old in internet time, at Kairos on Twitter. Goes by Justin Manchester. Doesn't go by that. That is his name. Hey, Justin, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. So I wanted to get you on the podcast just because I think you're a fascinating person and you have a lot to say. You have a lot of wisdom. You have a lot of life experience. And I thought it would just be good to riff with you for a while and see what comes up.
Sounds good.
Cool.
I'm ready to riff.
Cool. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, both kind of just various events in your life that have shaped you, but also, intellectual, spiritual, kind of just very, very salient kind of things leading up to where you are now.
Wow. I'm trying to make a short synopsis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was born in England, and so I immigrated to the United States when I was a small boy, completely educated in the United States, lost my accent after who knows how many years of teasing, but once the Beatles came out, I was popular. So,
yeah.
From there, I was actually raised in the Mormon church.
Mm-hmm.
The last meeting that I went to was when I was 16.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to just, think how I can create a short synopsis here, like I said, because psychedelics were hugely influential in my life early.
Yeah.
And from that, I went on, the typical spiritual search. Mm-hmm. I was predominantly involved in Christianity at the beginning because that had been my cultural conditioning. It's the way that I related to spirituality, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. And from there, I went to community college. I don't have a lengthy resume regarding education, but what I did to begin with was I actually felt like I was called, so to speak, to be a minister. So I studied for the ministry for 5 years, and I lived for 5 years in actually Southeast Texas. So, and I traveled all over the South. And from there, it's difficult for me to do a synopsis. It's almost like I need to write something because I try to include all, so much that was involved in the journey. And it's difficult for me.
Yeah.
Because it was, there were so many things for me to integrate over time.
Yeah. Well, you recently wrote a book, right?
I wrote 44,000 words, and then I went back to begin editing it. And as I was editing it, I just felt like this is not what I want to say at all. It's not that there weren't parts of it that I felt communicated directly what it was that I was really attempting to say. It's just that I felt like it wasn't even the type of story that I wanted to write. So when I began editing it, I just sort of said, you know what, just let it go for now. Just let it go and see what happens with your desire to write this. Because I felt compelled to tell the story because I see so much that's going on today where I feel like maybe my voice could be useful.
Right. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. No, I'm curious, like how you see kind of the trajectory of the last few decades. Do you like, where do you see like this in terms of kind of psychically, materially, politically? I'd like to get kind of, just because you've been around a few decades longer than me, get a little bit of your perspective. You know, where are we as humanity or as Americans, um, and and where do you think we're going right now? Do you think things are going well? Do you think things are going poorly? Are you a doomer? Are you an optimist? Are you a doomer optimist?
Well, maybe I was one of the first original doomer optimists and just never knew it, right?
Yeah.
That type of language wasn't there. I mean, it was more about people thinking about much the way it is now in terms of, you know, Christianity. I mean, people thinking in terms of the last days or the apocalypse, which, you know, you're very well versed in most of this type of language. So it's like the apocalypse to me, though, always meant the unveiling. So what's being unveiled? It wasn't that, you know, life on this planet. I mean, for anybody that just studies a bit of history,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's never been particularly easy, right?
Right.
There's always been challenges. I mean, that's why religions have arose in response to, you know, old age, suffering, and death,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of their, you know, the context in which they arose, because human beings haven't really changed that much in terms of, yes, we have this incredible evolution of technology, but at the same time, our basic fundamental needs as human beings is what I'm referring to, haven't changed that much.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Just like, I mean, you say, you know, in terms of like being a doomer optimist, and I really appreciate what all of you are doing in terms of, you know, people that identify with that label, simply going back to the earth. And it's always reminded me, the first time I heard the term doomer optimist, it reminded me of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
Mm-hmm.
And that, if you remember, you know, during the 60s with Woodstock and people trying to get back to the land, and there were even scenes in, you know, like Easy Rider in terms of groups of people trying to just get away from the cities and that type of life, and looking more to return to the garden and so forth, you know. Right. So I mean, to me, the thing that we're really concerned with, I think, is our deaths. Mm-hmm. Everybody that appears is going to disappear. So in terms of what our history is as a species, we have that. In terms of what our future is, I mean, certainly we can see from day to day exactly what people tend to do. And the incredible exaggerated sense of polarity and disassociation from, in many ways, our simple humanity. You know, and it's very interesting to see the development from, as you said, you know, I'll be 70 in 9 months. So, and I've always looked forward to saying I was 70 because I never thought that I'd make it to 70. Mm-hmm. So at 60 was when I thought I was going to be passing along. Right. In that realm. And the funny thing is, I had some very serious health issues during that, you know, period of time where I thought that was actually going to be the case. But regardless, I didn't. And in terms of the way I see it, it's it's so difficult to make a short synopsis about something that's so complex with everything that's going on today. And I was thinking, you know, I knew obviously you had invited me to do this podcast with you, and I was thinking about, you know, all of the different aspects that have come together. You know, there's this nexus of events in which you have, you know, we have the economy, all the financial markets, aliens, COVID, everything to do with housing, abortion, you know, the totality of the economy. I mean, fuel prices, food prices, even the acceptance and more of the dissemination of psychedelics and psychedelic perspectives, psychedelic insights. Mm-hmm. Which I think is really interesting. Yeah. I wouldn't call myself necessarily an advocate because I think that psychedelics are, to me, obviously, they're a sacrament. Yeah. They're a way of entering into an entirely different relationship with what you think of as yourself.
Right.
And
that was my introduction to them. That was how I was introduced to them, was as a sacrament as well.
So it's difficult to provide a synopsis, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to articulate, spontaneously all of the complicated aspects of the things that I think about and what I'm doing and so on. But I'm living very much. I wound up being I'm on a 20-acre ranch. I'm doing basically all of the things that you're attempting to do. I haven't gotten to the gardening aspect of it yet.
Yeah. Well, I haven't gone into the large livestock aspect of it, so maybe
we can. Well, I'm not. When I say ranch, I mean it's more. My wife has always been into horses.
Yeah.
And she was a barrel racer for a while. She grew up in New York, and so she learned how to ride English and so on and so forth. So we have horses and dogs and some barn cats, and we're looking forward to planning, doing some raised bed gardens, and I'm really looking forward to getting a greenhouse. I've always wanted to have a nice, large greenhouse.
Right. Very cool.
So I just think that it's important for people now to begin to become more self-sufficient, those that can, and I think it's going to be a natural function that people will tend to gather in groups. Like me, I live in a very small town in, Southeast Arizona.
Yeah.
And you tend to develop relationships with people that you don't even really talk about politics or religion or any of those things. You simply, if you're available to help someone, you help them.
Right. Yeah. Why do you think that we should become more self-sufficient? Is it because it's just kind of good for our souls? Do you see our current kind of life support systems not being up to the task? What makes you say that?
I think that it's simply a good idea for any human being to be not self-sufficient in the sense that they're withdrawing from the culture that they're in, or the small local society that they might inhabit. I think it's just a positive aspect of being a human being.
Yeah.
To be able to develop as many aspects of yourself as you can within relationship to life.
Right.
And life makes demands on us immediately.
That's right.
So I mean, if you can learn to be more in relationship with nature than just dependent upon other people and other sources of, whether it's your food or anything associated with your life, as a person.
Yeah. So let me ask you another question. What did the hippies get right, and what did they get wrong? And I want to kind of preface this a little bit. You talked about kind of the back to landers back in the day. And of course, in the late 60s, 70s, there was the back to land movement. There was the appropriate technology movement. And then the 80s happened. And, the 80s, at least what we see in the movies, I was born in the 80s, you have Wall Street, everyone's coked up all the time, at least according to popular description. And then in the 90s, we had all of kind of the techno optimism, techno utopianism. It seems like the vision of the hippies kind of got thrown out the window. And so I'm curious why you think that happened. Of course they were naive. A lot of their vision didn't come to pass. A lot of them stopped being hippies and, became, bought into the system. What did they get wrong and what did they get right? And what can we learn from that experience now, especially because a lot of boomer optimists do want to get back to the land. They do want to, raise animals. They want to grow gardens. They want to become more self-sufficient. What lessons can we learn from that experience?
Well, I think that what they got right, I can't say that I ever felt like necessarily I identified as a hippie.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't interested in abandoning society. I felt like that things had to be done within the context of whatever it was that was occurring at the time. And the whole reaction against it, to me, was just that. It was just a reaction against it.
Mm-hmm.
rather than understanding how one might integrate, some of the values of that culture into your lives. I mean, I think what a lot of the just the rebellion and the rejection of almost like a wholesale rejection of society, just like with Leary's, tune in, turn on, drop out, all of that. I think that what they got wrong was thinking that it was going to be easy, thinking that it was going to be something that it was all just going to happen.
Yeah.
And that the configuration of society at that time was going to permit this, right? Mm-hmm. Because there was a lot of hyperbole about, again, what psychedelics could do in terms of transforming the way we think, and therefore creating a society in which we were no longer focused on only making a living, or essentially. And trying to think how to phrase the, in terms of what they got wrong. They meaning, I mean, I was as much a part of it as anything else. And what's interesting is maybe a good analogy.
It's called the counterculture. If you don't want to, with the hippies, my dad's the same way. Like my dad was definitely counterculture, but he says, he didn't identify as a hippie. Although I've seen old pictures and but let's call it counterculture.
Yeah, counterculture, which is interesting in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
But I think that, again, what we got wrong was the wholesale rejection.
Yeah.
Of one way of thinking versus another, and again, I think it was just because of the transition from the 50s and the 60s. My own parents were they were very conservative to begin with.
Yeah.
And once they began to, they were members of the Mormon Church. My father was from Scotland, and he was he was my second stepfather. So I had a little bit of a storied history with fathers, right? I had a biological father and two stepfathers. But as they began to make money, they were both European. He was Scottish, my mother was English. He had been a very independent sort of man. And that's one thing that I did learn from him. I learned, to be responsible for myself. I learned how to be independent. I learned about business, and so forth, and what it took to be successful within that sort of a domain. But when the 60s came along, and as they began to make more money, they sort of became emblematic of what we could criticize as the counterculture. Because it was all, what else is there to exploit here, really, except money, food, and sex? It doesn't make any difference what label you place on it. I mean, people are constantly making rules and regulations and attempting to control other people based on those aspects of our experience.
Yeah.
So I think that what they got wrong was essentially thinking it was going to be so easy. And I equate that to the drug culture and psychedelics, because they do, in fact, make it seem like it's just a matter of just doing, right?
Yeah.
It's like there's no boundary there to be crossed. It's just having the insight and then doing. But you don't realize how much resistance there is, to change within the culture. I mean, as far as what we got right was, paradoxically, I think it would be, again, like the rejection. It's a paradox, because it's like we knew we weren't.
The non-dual awakening had a lot of duality in it, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I can sort of give you a synopsis by something. When I was 17 when I wrote this, and it wasn't something that I consider that I wrote, right? It was more a message to me. But at that time, at 17, here's what I wrote, because this was my worldview, and in a sense, I think it sort of encapsulates what it is we're talking about. It says what we got right and what we got wrong. So here it is. And remember, I was 17. I don't consider it a great piece of writing, but it necessarily really informs, it provides an insight into my worldview at the time. So here we go. Although many trips have been taken on the drug called LSD, there is still no trip so great as the one called LIFE. It begins when you emerge deep from within your mother's womb, a tiny little infant, too small to even grasp a spoon. But then this miracle called life begins to grow and sprout. And soon this young man now thinks he knows what life is all about. He stumbles through those adolescent years, his best friend, a cat. And then next week, her mother calls asking, why did he do that? 10 years have come and passed. He's married with 5 kids. He has that high-paying job with all the benefits. It's all over now. He really made it through. Or is he just another plastic man made and molded by the both of you? And I recited that to my parents. You know, they had been out on a date and I was out doing my teenage angst thing, strolling the road, you know, whatever. And when they came home, I said that to them, and they, you know, and my stepfather at the time, he was like, well, you know, it's pretty profound and so on, but you'll understand as you get older, right? So it was this sense in which I always felt like it was, this is what your life is about. But on the other hand, it's like, what are we actually doing? You know, we do need to participate in life in order to live, right? In terms of like creativity, why do we get involved? Why do we do the things that we do to begin with? So, you know, in terms of what the right and the wrong, I mean, to me, life is a continuous process of change and understanding.
Yeah.
And it's not about, you know, necessarily the differences in terms of the way people approach things, because sooner or later, I feel like as human beings, we have so much in common, and the things that we argue about with each other have so little significance. If we were willing, you know, if we were willing and able to give people their own way, let them, you know, within. I don't even want to. I'm hesitant because I don't even like to use the word reason, because it's not necessarily always reasonable to everyone, right? But to me, it's about granting the freedom, and it's about becoming an adult.
Right. So freedom and responsibility that comes.
Yeah, it's the typical. I mean, how much profundity do we really have to say? This is something I've been thinking a lot about lately. It's like, because I think I Googled it the other day or something, like 2 million podcasts or something, or I don't know. But, you know, it's just constant stream of information.
Yeah.
And so forth, and people making, you know, comments and having, you know, actions and reactions towards something that they're really not involved with. If they weren't on the internet with it, it just seems so strange that we get so tied up. My life the way that I say it, my life is so simple, right? In terms of the way I actually live, the relationships that I have. I don't have all of these problems and so forth that are so pressing for so many people in the realm of, well, just about everyone, you know, of being a human being. It seems like it's gotten much more complicated to simply be happy as a human being.
Right. Well, I think our podcast is the 2 millionth and first podcast. So.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this information flow in the internet. What kind of egregore or demon is the internet? Well, like it's clearly a pretty profound occurrence, you know, probably on par with the printing press in terms of its impact or potential impact on society. And it seems like a very mixed bag. You know, this capacity for almost like a global brain that, you know, global brain that seems pretty schizophrenic right now. You know, it seems pretty profound in the grand historical sweep of things. I'm curious if you have thoughts on what the internet represents and what the potential and the pitfalls of it are.
It's so powerful.
Yeah.
It's thinking about it, and you know, I mean, the truth is, I think that it represents it represents us, the totality of it.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I met years ago. We haven't talked that much or anything, but there's so many people that I would have never met. This is a common refrain that you hear from people without the internet, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about how we use it. It's so, that's such a, you know, generic statement, you know.
Yeah.
It's a tool and it's how we use it. But how many things in life are like that, you know?
Yeah.
In terms of what are we putting into it? I mean, the internet is representative of us, as well as, of course, yes, we're all concerned with AI and this and so forth. But what is AI if it's not coming from us collectively? I mean, AI takes the totality of everything that's occurring, that is being fed.
Right.
So I think our concerns are. It's kind of interesting to be concerned with AI or emphasize our concerns with AI and not be concerned with what it is we're actually up to. Mm. And then you think about, you know, the internet and Bernays and people like Bernays that were, you know, that monopolized advertising, were able to manipulate, you know, the herds of humanity. And that's the obvious challenge that we're facing with the internet, is how easy it is for people to become so tribally identified, and in which they're no longer thinking. So you call it an egregore, and an egregore, you know, it is like an infiltration into the capacity of a human being to think, right? And so they're just all of these ways in which people identify with some form of thinking or some aspect, whether it's you know, religious beliefs or political ideology, whatever it is. I mean, it's obvious that it becomes intensified through the internet. And that's what I meant when I said about, you know, people can live very ordinary lives, but if they constantly have a device in their hand, what kind of life are they living, right? Yeah. They're just going to the grocery store. They have a job. They're doing this. They're doing that. But all of a sudden, they're caught up in all of these, you know, this drama. And what are they actually able to do? Right. In terms of influencing. So, I mean, it's funny because, you know, growing up, I watched Star Trek, right? So remember the first episode, and you look at the original Star Trek now, and in terms of technology, it was absurd, but you had the communicator, right? So the communicator, you're able to communicate with your, you know, obviously with the crew and so on. What I'm getting at is that this capacity to be in constant communication, right, with people, on call. You're always on call. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, I mean, but the positive aspect is being able to meet and have conversations with different people and make connections, because, I mean, ultimately that's what we're all doing anyway. Yeah. You know, we do seek out people that are like-minded. It's not that that some of us can't interact with those with very differing worldviews than we have, but essentially, I mean, we don't want to constantly be in conversations about things that really that are not really aspects of our lives. They're just
right. It's like we're living in a hyper abstract realm,
exactly.
and our lived material reality is being neglected.
Yeah, it's so much simpler. I mean, yeah. I can go on the internet. I get up in the morning. I get up at 5:30 every morning. I go for a couple of mile hike. I kiss my wife. I have breakfast. I pet my dogs. You know, I go to the office. And I talk to people, and I look out for other for their concerns.
Yeah.
You know, you're in a relationship, and when you feel like your life, your life is meaningful in the sense of how you live it in the context of your relationships. We're all the same in that regard.
Yeah.
You know, if you have horrible relationships with people, you don't tend to think that life is all that grand.
Yeah.
But when you have great relationships, regardless of what life is, ultimately you feel like you're living something that's worthwhile.
Right. Right. Well, nevertheless, you are online sometimes, and I've noticed that you're a pretty astute observer of kind of what I would call the mimetic landscape. You interact with people from different, what I would call mimetic tribes. I would call you a mimetic mediator, right? You're able to kind of speak different languages. You're able to appeal to kind of different sensibilities. We've been part of different kind of crews, right? There was like the whole Ion crew that we interacted with. There's a metamodernists, right? I've seen you put metamodernism or metamodern man in your bio, right? Of course, now I'm part of this doomer optimism thing. There's all of these different kind of groups, and I'm curious, like what do you observe from kind of being able to kind of survey this kind of landscape? What do you observe in terms of its evolution?
It's interesting because sometimes I'll go onto Twitter and I'll feel like, and I've mentioned it in some of my tweets, I'll feel like I've walked into if you've ever gone into a big cafeteria, and here and everything's in movement and people are talking, but you can't really hear an individual conversation. You just hear all this noise, right?
Yeah.
And people they're focused on whoever it is they're with, and they're focused on eating. So I appreciate that you brought up that you think that I'm a mediator, because I believe that my experience is what makes me a mediator.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can live, you could say that I live in a red culture, but I don't, but that's not difficult for me, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure if I started spouting a lot of non-dualist lingo or whatever, people go, what in the hell is he talking about? But you don't need to do that, right? None of that really has any significance to me within the context of having a relationship with another person, right? So they're concerned with the same things.
Yeah.
And to be when I look online and I see, well, there are some people that they're just disagreeable. They love to be disagreeable. It doesn't matter what you say. They'll change a few of the words just to make it theirs and make it seem like you missed something, right? So it's like it's all of the that type of thing. It's annoying at times, and it's like, why do people focus on the things they do, but yet if you're able to actually meet the person and talk with them, that's the only way that you're ever going to really begin to understand. So to me, it's ridiculous to be, criticizing people and making statements about things that really you don't really know that they're just arguing over nothing, or they're arguing over their own assertions. They're arguing with themselves in many cases, because there's so much projection that's going on. So you could say something in a tweet, and it's the same way if you write an email. When you're doing emails to people, and you're doing like a professional or business or a technical email, you can look at it and try to put yourself in the place, you know, in the perspective of take the perspective of the person that you're writing it to, and how are they going to relate to that? Right. But there's so much, you know, just pure reaction. And people are, you know, people are fused with their identities. They can't talk about their identity from a perspective in which they see how it's just an interaction in relationship, right? And it's not necessary to, this whole notion of constantly being right about something is absurd to me.
Right, right.
You know, because I mean, once you start talking, there's too much talk and there's not enough real talk. You know,
yeah,
like you need to have that kind of a relationship with people if you're going to like, again, I'm thinking of it in terms of, you know, like the dialogos. Yeah. Once you've experienced having a conversation with someone where you can actually, it feels like that there is a force. It feels like there's another presence that becomes involved.
Yeah.
In a conversation in which there's no agreement or disagreement, but there's like it's like a flow, and it's like you're in a process of discovery together about what it is you're trying to communicate. And the whole notion of language, again, language is so powerful, yet it's so destructive.
Yeah.
Because words have, you know, words are triggering to people. If you say a word and you notice that a person has an extreme reaction to it, then you can bring that up. You can try to talk to the person about it and try to further explain. But without real conversation, you just get a lot of assertions and conflict. You know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've noticed that you do a lot of nice tweets about kind of, I guess, etymology of like the breaking down words and you know how, you know, words can have multiple meanings.
Yeah, I find that fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been using the word. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I've been thinking today. Or in the last few weeks, I've been thinking about the word stand. You know, and how you ask first, what do you stand for? Okay. And then you have all these images. You know, and how many different variations and connotations the word stand has. But yet, you know, if you ask somebody, you know, and when I say that, I'm looking at it like it's a spontaneous event where you stand up, right? Something that makes you stand, that you're willing to put yourself on the so-called line for. You know, what do you stand for? You know, what is your standing? All of these different ways in which relate to language. Right. And I think you know, it's unfortunate that I find it humorous because then I think I'm about to say I think it's so unfortunate that people are so unconscious. It's like, you know, so
it's hard. It's hard. No one else isn't lying like me. I'll just wait for you guys.
It's like really strange.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you'll see people that get. I used to have this problem with my stepfather too.
Yeah.
In terms of, I found it so funny that he would get so upset about something so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, there's a way of respecting someone and not having them feel like you're making fun of them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, bringing, you know, that's the other thing. I mean, there's people are so fucking serious about themselves, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, really, what is it that you're, you know, what is it you're so seriously committed to here? You know, this perspective that you have, it's the right thing. Do you know, I mean, do you actually realize that we really don't know what's going on here?
Right.
No, we really don't. Yeah. I mean, we've made sense. out of many things, and we do what we do. But to think that we actually have some sort of ultimate knowledge about what all this is about is absurd.
Yeah. Do you think that we do you think that we have the ability to dig deeper into the truth of reality, or do you think it's all just projections? Like is there, say you're on a, you have a spiritual experience, perhaps you're on psychedelics, perhaps you've been fasting, or something like, in those moments, do you think it's just kind of more a projection of our psychology, or do you think we're actually penetrating into, a little bit deeper into the fabric of reality?
It's always again, it's the language. The language is fascinating. So the notion of deeper versus what is the difference when we're talking about inner life or the experience or subjectivity?
Yeah.
Spirituality. I used to use the word frequently, and I too made the distinctions between religion and spirituality and so forth. But then if you look at it, if you just look, what is it that you're actually saying? What is your actual direct experience?
Right.
What's the difference between spiritual experience and taking a walk? It's the whole notion, the whole Zen notion about chopping wood,
right,
and carrying water. Because, as far as my own experience with psychedelics, that was one of the first things that I noticed.
Yeah.
Was that how strange simply being was, right? So people get fascinated with their hand, or maybe they get whatever it is they get fascinated with. It could be an insect or whatever, and then all the complexity and all the relationships that insect has within the environment and so forth can become very interesting. Whereas before you're just walking around in this sort of dream in which you're this person that's got to do this and do that, and you just you adapt to the conditions under which you were born.
Yeah.
So it's like, if this whole idea of it being something else, I think, is part of the problem.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't use the word enlightenment. As far as my preference goes, to me that seems like it's added something, right?
Right.
But the idea of realization, well, what did you realize? The simplest way that I've ever heard it said was, that which I was looking for was this which is looking, right? So it's just this sense that this direct realization of attention itself. Because with attention, attention can't become an object of itself. It's just attention, period. So the whole idea of, you're talking about deeper layers and this whole notion of reality, the only reality that I've ever known is that I am, right?
Yeah.
That's all I've ever really known. And then I proceeded to adapt. But the whole time that I used to, the first experience I had, I was very young. I was I was an adolescent, teenager. And the first time that I experienced that directly, I had no words for it. I had no language. I'd say something like, well, it's like coming up against a brick wall, or, it's just, there was no language for it.
Yeah.
In terms of what it felt like to just suddenly be aware that I was, and that was really all I knew. And then from there, everyone is telling me, I'm telling a story, they're telling me a story. And we have all these ways of relating to what life is, and what is meaningful and what is not meaningful, how we create meaning, how we question whether something is meaningful or say that it's meaningless. Even something that's meaningless is meaningful because you're born into meaning, right? What does it mean when your mother kisses you? How does it feel, right? You know what I'm saying? It's like this whole, we're born into relationship, which is direct and simple in its nature. We feel what we feel, and then we have all of these other, people that are telling it, whether these people are through books or, wherever we're receiving this other information from, you have people telling you about something about reality. It's like, what is reality? Well, this is reality, even though everything is impermanent. So reality itself is somewhat confusing, because it seems like we're talking about something that's independent from from what we are, as though we're talking about reality, and while we're talking about it, we seem to be separated from it.
Right.
Just because we're talking. So if the whole idea just to sit and be quiet for some people is horrifying. They can't do it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even taking up the practices of like meditation. Why do people meditate? What is the motivation?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's what the whole notion of subjectivity and what people call spirituality is about: understanding motivation. Why are you doing what you do?
Right.
Whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recall, one term that comes to mind as you're talking is the cosmic joke. And what I mean by that is, people who are seeking enlightenment, through hallucinogenics or meditation, they're working really hard, for years. They're seeking, they're looking for something, for a higher state. And then when something happens, when there's some kind of awakening, it's like, oh, it's just so simple. This is it. It's just like,
right. It's kind of disappointing.
Beingness as it is, right? It's just like, oh, there's my hand.
Right.
I guess I'm awakened now, right? And it's like, and some people, jokingly kind of refer to it as like it's almost a letdown in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, because it's like, oh, it's like I spent all this time searching for something only to find that it's right here, right? And it was always right there.
Yeah. It's almost like you feel like you're an idiot. What am what was I looking for, right? It's like it was me just looking, right? And then I'm going to come up with the whole story and the interpretation of what it all means and the grand scheme,
Yeah, and at the same time, it seems like we almost inevitably have to go through some kind of journey like that, because, as you say, we're kind of born into this conditioning, into these cultural stories, and we need a lot of these stories in order to function, in order to operate in the world. But there's a distinction between believing the stories, kind of being embedded in them, versus being aware of the stories and understanding, that some of them are functional and some of them have become dysfunctional, right? And so it's like there's almost this, if you're able to kind of not take things so seriously, not take yourself so seriously, your identity so seriously, all of a sudden it almost opens up the field to just be able to play a little bit, or to be creative.
Yeah. I love that word, play. And going into that feeling like it was when you were a child.
Right.
You didn't have answers.
Insights also get, they get thrown up against, we don't want to call it reality. I'll call it the biophysical process of life, right? If we don't eat for a while, we'll die. If we run out of, bringing into a doomer optimism theme, if we destroy our topsoil, we won't be able to eat, right? If we heat up our climate too much, we won't be able to live in certain climate zones. If we run through all of our fossil fuels, we won't be able to power industrial society. So there are this kind of like biophysical processes that we are, I would say, accountable for, but how we relate to those, all of the cultural stories that allows us to relate to those are very, there's some kind of tethering, but there's also a lot of affordance. There's also a lot of different ways to relate to nature, let's just say, right? And almost like naturing as a verb.
Yeah. And it's like you said, and in terms of many of your posts and what you're doing with your life, it is about being more connected with nature and being responsible for yourself, right? I mean, in
And
conjunction.
family and friends and community and.
Well, exactly. That's the whole. That's part of it. It's not that you. When I say use the word like sovereign, it doesn't mean that you're independent. We're all interdependent in this realm. You know, whatever this is. It's obvious that we're interdependent, and what I do and what you do makes a difference to those within our immediate circle, and then the rest of it is, you know, if you want to get into the you know, the butterfly flapping his wings in the Amazon and so on, then that's fine. But to me, I'm a very practical person in terms of what can I actually do? What am I doing now? Why am I doing it? You know, how can I whether it's how can I assist this person? What you know, how can I bring something to a person? I mean, as simple as giving them a job, whatever. You know, I hire a lot of local people here to work for us, you know, as well as the company that I work for. Yeah. So that's as absurd as it might sound. I mean, that is where that's where all of us actually live, other than whether you call them the elites or whatever, but there are some people that are seriously pulling everybody else's strings, you know. They've got massive backing, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions and millions of people that essentially are that easily malleable to their opinions, right? And what they project. Yeah. Again, it goes back to the whole notion of the advertising with Bernays and all of the, you know, when you just look at the commercial society we live in, you know,
manufacturing demand for things that aren't good for us and that we don't need, and
the
planet.
But
you're in the construction business, right? You're a builder, right?
Consulting engineering.
Consulting engineering.
So it's construction materials testing.
Okay.
You know, quality control, the geotechnical aspects of projects. So we might start with an environment. What we do, if I gave you a synopsis of the services that we provide, it would be, you could start out with a phase 1 environmental, maybe it would go to a phase 2, and then we would do a geotechnical evaluation. So we send out a drill rig and a geologist, and we drill the site based on, you know, and give that information to the owner developer, which go to the structural engineer, and they can calculate what types of soil bearing that they have, what types of structure the soils will support, what kind of remediation needs to be done to the soils to support higher loads, you know, on and on. And then construction materials testing. So we would test all of the materials during the course of construction, soils, concrete, asphalt, provide inspections on structural steel, structural masonry. So I started out in construction, but basically it's the whole package of what, you know, what involved in commercial construction and mining, the mining industry too. So industrial, commercial. We do some work on occasion with, you know, custom homes and that sort of thing, but primarily it's commercial and industrial. Okay. But I started out in construction, and I mean, I do, you know, my wife tells me, which I'm very proud of this fact, that I work like I'm 22 years old, because I'm literally out there and it's hot. You know, it's been pretty hot lately. We're finally getting some rain, and it's really fantastic to get that. But I mean, I put 10, 12 hours out, you know, just because there was a lot of work to do preliminary here to all the remodeling is first. I had to get all that, sort of like creating, you know, a base of operations as far as I was concerned. It's like, we need to get this place, you know, to functional capacity. And then like recently, I just put another well in. So we have this area used to be, you know, artesian. I mean, it's still in the specific location that we're in, their water is fairly shallow, but the water table has, you know, started to recede somewhat. But we have one well that services the 2 houses and the you know, the horses, the barns and everything, with it's probably only about 70 to 100 feet deep. The well that I just put in is about 400.
Right. Are you worried about that you're living, you said, in Southeast Texas?
No, Arizona.
Arizona. Are you worried about there's a lot of like climate change projections, having to do with the American West, that, the water table is going to continue to drop, wildfires. Are you worried about that in terms of kind of what you're seeing with your work? Like, are you seeing any signs of kind of dangers or?
Well, you say I'm not worried. No,
No.
I'd be simply because again, I take the perspective, and it's not really just a perspective, it's the way I feel.
Yeah.
It's like we're all born into this world, whatever this is.
Mm.
There are certain things that we can do to be of real value and assistance to each other. And there are certain things that we can do that create more fucking trouble than we can almost imagine, because we've already done it, right?
Right.
We've created so much insanity here. And yet life itself, if it was taken from the perspective of simply being cooperative and cooperative explorers, right? Like we're exploring, we're still exploring. We don't know shit, really. We've been given glimpses of something that I feel like it could just as easily be our future or our present as the tendencies that we have to utter destruction. Why do we have this tendency to destroy instead of create?
Mm. Yeah.
Meaning we face all these things, and I'm not being facetious. I don't worry.
Yeah.
It's not something that's part of my, it's not something that I feel at all. I mean, I'm concerned for our children and what it is that we're doing to make matters worse rather than better, because that's pretty obvious in terms of what we are doing. But this whole notion of we, who is this we? Because we is all of these groups. I've got something flying around here.
We for you is you and that thing flying around in the room right now.
That was me, and actually it looked like it was a piece of dust or something.
Okay.
So
you're in a relationship with the dust.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, we're going to be turning into it shortly. So.
Hopefully not too shortly.
Well, who knows?
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. I mean, you live, and that's the whole thing. As far as living that way.
Mm.
Do you live in the consciousness of your death?
Yeah.
Not morbidly. There's no morbid sense about it. But if you're actually alive, it's easy to say, "Oh yeah," from moment to moment to moment. Are you alive? Are you actually present? Right. But the truth is that you go in and out of that. But if you're living with that consciousness that every day is the day, every moment is the moment. You have no idea how long you're going to be here.
Yeah.
And that's that's the truth. If you want to talk about reality, that's reality.
Yeah.
And that is confirmed on a daily basis.
Yeah.
People that you knew, people that you loved are gone now. And the older that you get, the more of them are gone.
Yeah.
And so we say they're dead, but they live on in us.
Right.
But I mean, if we live from that consciousness of being dead already, then we can bring life. It's truly in my own life, it's been such that's the most paradoxical feeling that I can think of.
Yeah.
Having that sense of here today, gone. Boom, boom, in, out, whatever that means. Yeah. So what I do, how I live my life, makes a big difference to everything and everyone. So if I live that way, and if I'm truly concerned, with others' well-being, then what is it I'm going to do? What am I going to live? It seems to me there would be a tendency to live more conscious of what is of real value.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems that in our culture, there's a denial of death. And I think some of that is traced to the decline of religion. Like religion, gave us stories of kind of our place in the cosmos. And as that's declined, I think for a lot of people, they've just decided to ignore death. And, it seems like a lot of problems spring from that, right? Of
Right. Or
trying to live, thinking you're going to live forever, or trying to get the anxiety, push the anxiety away by consuming things. For me, the term doomer optimism, there's kind of the standard kind of notion of like society trajectory, it's currently not going well, but there's still something to live for. That's kind of like the standard version. But for me, the deeper existential notion is the doomer part is coming to terms with your own death. And just like you say, when you do that, then for me, life becomes more vivid, right? And I like how you put it too, of like, it's an interesting kind of contemplative exercise to imagine that you're already dead, right? Or to, and you're already dead. It's already happened on geologic, cosmic timescales. You're basically already dead. So, but there's still something here. There's something real right now. Even this, even in death, there's like, all of a sudden there's this onrush of life, and it's very immediate and undeniable.
Yeah, I mean that's
the optimism part. The optimism is just kind of
that it's inevitable that there will be this this pendulum, meaning like you have like you mentioned techno-utopianism and so forth, this whole notion of us integrating the machine to the point that we can have a chip that in our brains that connects us directly to, well, it somehow would be beyond the internet then. If you were, and why would you want that? Can you turn it off?
Right.
Why would you? But I just feel like it's so important for people to get. Sounds like a cliche, but to get back in touch with nature again. Just to sit on the beach or go to the woods, or go look at the redwood trees. Everything that's happening. There's so much that nature is not kind.
No, it's not kind.
No, it's not. It's not kind at all. Which is interesting, right?
No.
I mean, but we don't feel, and we don't. Well, early. I mean, there are still people, but early in our evolution. I mean, think about how we related to the storms and the gods and everything associated with nature. I mean, that's where our religions come from, essentially, right? Until it enters, this whole idea of transcendence and that which is beyond nature, but yet remains nature itself, right? So but essentially, all I'm saying is people they're caught in this world that is reality to them. It's the reality that they know. It's the reality that they continue to feed and live in, but yet it's highly seductive.
Right.
It's poisonous in so many ways. And the things that they really value are so superficially destructive, and yet have destroyed them at depth. If you understand what I'm saying, it's like it becomes something that they're just so caught up in it that, well, I use the word fused. They're fused with this identity that is created through their relationship with technology and all of the information that they're being force-fed.
Right.
They really.
And algorithm also kind of creates this cyber feedback
loop. It's feeding on itself, right? The whole idea about, there has to be, if it's conflict, if it's something negative, if it's death, destruction, and misery. I mean, if your attention is constantly focused on that, it's not that it's not true. It's not that there aren't literally millions of human beings being consumed in the fires of nature, so to speak,
Yeah.
In every given moment. That's all true. But that's not, but it's also true that you have this sense of being alive in a world that is beautiful in so many ways as well. So it's again, it's the Tao, right? You don't escape that. That's the reality of that you actually live in, is this play, this interplay of, you could call it, in some cases people feel like they're opposites. They're also complementary. Without one, you don't have the other.
Yeah. Yeah. A term that when you're talking about before, how everyone's kind of in their own reality, a term that I like is, reality tunnels. Like we're all in kind of our reality tunnels, and we can't really escape our reality tunnels, but we can be aware, one, that we're in a reality tunnel, and that gives a little bit of humility. And two, I mean, for me, I would say one of my just kind of natural inclinations, since I can remember, is being very curious about other people's reality tunnels. Like, what is it that makes you tick? Like what is it, and of course I'm never going to know. It's like I never, there's so many experiences that we have that are just untranslatable to anybody else. But I can try and make at least a kind of a mental model.
Except to those that have similar experiences, because it's just like doing the whole notion of eye gazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you gaze into somebody else's eyes.
Yeah.
Well, what is it that you're seeing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an intense activity. I've done that.
Very intense activity, and people don't do it that often. And then there's all of the chicanery and the nonsense that gets associated with some people that that think of themselves as gurus or project themselves as gurus, and they're going to take you there through the gaze and their company and so forth. And but there's truth in that. See, that's the whole thing. The whole notion of truth and reality. It's like being able to make that kind of contact with somebody shows you the same thing over and over again. We're all the same being. My view is that we're all the same being. That's what I'm saying. When I look into somebody else's eyes, I don't see another. I see the same being.
Yeah.
And you think about how similar our actual day-to-day experience is, and the fact that we're able to talk about it, that in and of itself is very strange.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. I mean, the fact that words, even though they, we all relate to words and phrases differently, but the fact that we're able to coordinate with each other, that we're able to somewhat understand each other, especially, that's the power of relationship, is if you have a misunderstanding and something physically, in kind of your life gets messed up, you're like that's gonna calibrate very quickly, right? And I think that's actually a really, I don't know, I think that's a really profound notion, that we are in these completely kind of different reality tunnels. We're all carrying around a different set of stories, different set of impressions, different set of qualitative impressions throughout our lives, and yet somehow it's able to kind of dance with that of others. And occasionally we get those glimpses, those insights that actually this person actually seems like me. I don't seem like different from them, right? And those are very profound experiences.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I mean that is, I think that's what we seek.
Yeah.
The moment that we become aware that, the moment I become aware that I am, then I seek contact. I seek relationship. I'm already in relationship. We're born. I mean, we're born in interdependence.
Yeah.
And then we begin to develop this notion that somehow we're independent. Really? You're not. Your whole life began with in interdependence. You were nurtured by another body. You're brought into this world. When you think about, it's like there's more or less of the same thing here.
Yeah.
You could be, you know, an elite with yachts and women and everything you can freaking imagine that money can buy. And it's just more of the same thing. Another guy's got a little boat that he goes, you know, goes bass fishing with. If you understand what I'm saying, it's just more or less of the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's not about things. Anybody that's lived long enough, unless they learn nothing, I guess, will readily discuss how important relationships have been in their life versus achievements. Because a lot of the times that, you know, when you meet people at key moments in your life, and they exert a profound influence, as maybe you also do on them. But this whole notion of relationship is so important, and when we avoid it and go into these places where we think we're all alone, which is totally absurd. And you know, as I'm sure you know, just like the word alone is all one.
Yeah.
To be alone is just to be one.
Mm. Right.
But everything that's constructed here seems to be constructed through otherness. You know, it's all of our difficulties. Yeah. It's like why do people believe what they believe? Because they don't have any, you know, they don't have any other experience. If you look at people, and you know, we think, how can they be the way they are? How can they think the way they think? But they've just been born and bred.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the whole, I mean, to me, the most important thing is at some point in life that you're able to, through whatever mysterious means it takes, is you're able to observe yourself, the thing that you call yourself, and there is no self except in relationship to others. So that you see all of your, you know, all of your projections, everything that we tend to do is shown to us through our relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, the best cave, you know, I've heard it said, the best cave is an ordinary life. And I think that's very true.
Yeah, well, a common line of discussion in our circles is, you know, there's kind of this critique of society that, you know, a lot of our relationships and our, you could say, functional independence have been replaced by either the market or the state, or at least attempted to be replaced, right? So, you know, whereas we used to, I don't know, the grandparents used to live with, you know, the parents and help raise the children. Now they're sent off to nursing homes, right? They're separated. You know, it's outsourced to the state or to a company, right? Or where we used to, you know, neighbors used to grow food and trade it with each other. You know, now we go to the supermarket, right? You know, there's many examples I can reel off, and you know, kind of a consequence of that is that you know, especially if we're kind of, say, in a highly kind of technological, we're always, you know, on our devices, we become kind of atomized, right? We you know, we push an app, food comes to our door, we hardly have to interact with that person. We don't have to think about all of where that food came from, right? You know, all of the externalities associated with that. And so that's, at least, you know, I would say that's one trend of society that we've seen, you know, over the last few decades. But, you know, it seems like there's also, especially after COVID, there's also this other trend now, which I think is very positive, of exactly what you're talking about, right? Of realizing that, you know, actually relationships matter, right? Not only for our psychological health, but, you know, things are kind of scary out there these days, right? In terms of like the economy, we don't know what's going on with the economy. We hear reports about, you know, catastrophic ecological collapse. We hear all, you know, all of these things, and realizing, oh, wow, you know, like we're actually, not only is it not healthy to be alone, you know, mentally, you know, we actually have to rely on each other again, or we probably will, you know, to make it through, you know, as humans.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and I guess that I think it's always been the case.
Yeah.
But somehow technology has given us the illusion that we can do what we want to do without any assistance, in a sense. You know, it's some sort of strange relationship that we have with these screens.
Yeah.
And it's just like you and I mean, we haven't talked for probably 2 years.
Yeah.
But I just feel like I'm talking to an old friend, you know.
Yeah.
It's in this case, you'd be my son. You're probably the same age as my son, like 42 or something, aren't you? 43.
I'm turning 39. Turning 30.
Oh, so you're younger. You're a little bit younger than my son. He was born in 81.
Okay.
So it's, you know, you've asked me a lot of questions, and the truth is, I don't talk much.
Mm-hmm.
I can write much better than I talk, probably. I could get, if I could get some more practice talking, you know, I'd get better at it. But you're probably, as far as doing any podcasts or talking with anyone live like this, I've only done it one other time, and that was like 2-3 years ago with Garrett.
Yeah.
You know, that was it. That's the only time I've done anything like this. I'm very interested in getting to know more people, because I believe that we you know, and maybe now the conversation it get a little bit more interesting, because it's like, you asked about the internet. This is what we can use the internet for.
Right.
And there, you know, it's not just about some Dunbar number, which is, you know, some imaginary number that's going to work, and that's how you're going to create a community and so forth. To me, I mean, how many people have more than probably 10 friends? And how many of those friends are actually close friends? So to me, it's like this illusion of living in this grandiose, you know, little village, which would be really cool. If you had 150, I mean, it would be so cool to see what you could do with 150 people to create a village. You talk about the aesthetics. I mean, the thing that we need to do with the internet now is to have multiple locations.
Yeah.
Where I can come and see you if I want, Jason. You can come and see me. I got a place for you to stay. You want to go ride a horse? Want to go for a Jeep tour? Want to go up in the mountain? You know what I'm saying? You can have this sense of larger community that's initiated through the internet.
Yeah.
So that we're not all going to be in the same locations. Just like, you know, we could talk about game B. We could talk about all these notions about creating alternative ways of relationship, because that's what they are. They're alternative forms of politics. People don't like the word politics, but to me, politics is just relationship. When I say politics, I mean relationship in a much more formal sense, in which we're making agreements with one another about how we're going to conduct ourselves and what kind of requirements we're going to have of our, you know, they're like expectations. So then you have a law, right? It's just like everything that's going on now. I think, and I look at all of these things, whether it's from abortion to guns to this, to, you know, this whole madhouse of rules and regulations, and people trying to make it happen, right? People trying to force order. You can't force order. You have to, order arises out of the capacity to observe. Order will naturally arise. So if you see that what you're doing is creating whatever, whether it's an environmental problem, whether it's a problem with your wife or your son or daughter, whatever form of relationship it is, when you see that, that seeing itself brings about change. Make sense?
Yeah. No, I think that, I mean, that's profound, not just on a social level, but, you know, one of the magic things that I discovered with meditation was that just by observing your thought patterns, how they related to your body, to, you know, contractions or openings in your body, just observing it, just becoming aware of those patterns, you know, actually is like 99.9%.
Exactly.
Work. Everything else kind of takes care of itself. Right? If you're,
you know, it's not like it's not like it's not like you have to do something with it. The seeing is the doing.
The seeing, right? The seeing, you know,
when you truly see it.
Right. Right.
You know, you can call it. You could call it what you like, but it's like a direct recognition of, hey, this is what I'm up to. That's interesting, but there's no attachment to it. because you're no longer fused with it. You're not enacting it, you're observing it. So that gave you the space. That observation is the space in which change can occur.
Right.
And so what is it, what is it that we want? I know what I want. Mm-hmm. I want to have more relationships like this relationship that I'm having with you right now. This simple exchange. I have that in my own life, with my wife, with my son, with my extended family, with all the people that live around me. I live around some very interesting people, and I don't have the same kind of, it's interesting because even so-called spiritual people can be so fucking unkind. It's funny. Yeah. It's bizarre. They can be so judgmental. And I have so many people around me that, like, as an example, there's a small community where it's almost like they're not Mennonites, but I'm trying to just describe their sort of ethic. You know what I mean? In the way they live their lives. So they hunt, they fish, they have a farm. The women wear long dresses. You know what I'm saying? That they're not heavily made up. There's all that whole kind of. They just call themselves followers of Jesus. Right. Followers of Christ. And do you know, when I drove onto that property, I could feel it. I could feel the peace. And they're so open and receptive, and just, we get eggs from them. We do things for them. They do things for whatever it is. I'm just saying there's all kinds of different people in small rural America, all around this country, that they don't really have any major issues with anything or anyone else. Yeah. They're kind. They're respectful. Yeah. They're not trying to convert you into something else. You're just welcome, right? You know what I'm saying? When you go to the house, you feel welcome. When you're around, that they're just a simple, peaceful presence, which is unusual. And you notice it that much more, especially when you leave larger cities. The largest cities that I lived in were Phoenix and Seattle. But it's been so long since I lived in one. Since 2005, I left and I moved to Tucson. Tucson's not a large town. I think it's 1 million people in Pima County. So it's a smaller, much more smaller city, but then to go away from the city and, this area probably had, I think it's 1,500 people or something, and everybody's, they're not necessarily, I'm trying to think if there's any actual farms. There's a lot of pecans. Pecans are big out here. So they grow a lot of nuts. There's, hay, of course, for animals, cotton, different locations, so forth, alfalfa, oranges. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of all the different, not so much oranges here, but everything that you can grow in this environment. This is about 3,800 feet above sea level. Right. So it's still getting hot in the summer, and pretty cold in winter. I get down to the teens. Yeah. Well, Justin, we're starting to approach 90 minutes. Amazing. I don't even feel like we talked that long. I know. Well, I want to just comment on, what you said is kind of the potential of the internet of making relationships, having conversations, and also what you described of like starting to meet each other in real life, creating, physical locations where we can welcome each other. That's really, I think, for me at least, and I know definitely for a few others, that's kind of the vision of doomer optimism, right? Is like, we're all kind of trying to live locally focused lives, but we're also on the internet. You'd think that would be a contradiction, but no, I don't think it's a contradiction. Ideally, it's not, because one thing that we're doing later this summer is that we're having these kind of bioregional meetups where basically people in different regions are meeting up with each other at somebody's place who can host them. They're helping them out with they're probably gonna have like a work day where like they help each other out. Yeah, I saw that. It was Rizoma. I'm sorry, who posted that? Is it Rizoma? Yeah, Rizoma School. So that's Ashley. Yeah, she posted something about that. And I thought that's because that's part of the vision that I have here. I got like a 7-acre location that I would plan on having like a central sort of a meeting open air where, you know, whether people wanted to speak or music or have a farmer's market, all of that sort of thing, you
Well,
know.
I'm sure a lot of people in our network would be, you know, especially who live around there, would love to, you know, come check out your place sometime. I also want to extend the invitation. You know, we have this thing where, you know, if we interview somebody, if we host somebody, you know, they're then qualified if they want to host somebody else, like for a conversation, right? So if there's somebody that you want to talk to, could be a neighbor that you find very interesting.
I'd actually like to get into that and get into more of the conversational aspect, because like I said, it's a practice. I'm sure that you, as long as you've been doing this, you've been doing podcasting for a while. It's interesting because it's like, I feel like at the beginning of, you know, like you're asking me questions and I haven't talked to you for 2 years or whatever. And it's almost like I just feel like I need to just sit here and be quiet. And so that doesn't really make great podcast. Sit in silence and laugh. That would actually be probably more advantageous and beneficial to a lot of people if they could just hear people actually laugh, you know, and just be with each other.
Yeah.
But there's, you know, got to keep up the entertainment, my friend.
We try.
You don't want to lose followers.
Yeah. Well, we put out 2 podcasts a week. Part of it is because we do have, you know, a few hosts now. And so, you know, if anybody actually listens to all of these, you know, God bless them.
Yes.
You know,
I don't know.
me, I mean, I like getting out there. I like hearing other people, you know, I like knowing that other people heard conversations and got something out of it. But for me, it's just an excuse to talk to interesting people.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I've always, like I said, since I met you, I have a great deal of respect for you. And I like the direction that your life is taking and the things that you're doing. I mean, it's interesting to go back to more familial ties, right? It's like all the things that got rejected. You asked me in the beginning, you know, like the whole thing about what did the hippies get wrong? It was like, well, there's a sense in which you know, just your family is important, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's part of the rejection when, you know, ultimately what is needed is kind of there's like a differentiation, but then a reintegration.
yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what I mean. I've gone full circle in my life, the way I because I grew up in a little Mormon town, farming town. You know, everybody had, well, I'd say everybody, so many people had, you know, horses, cattle, whatever it was, all kinds of animals, and they were farming this or that, or they were growing fruits, they were canning, they were doing all the things that you guys. That's what's fun. I smile when I see all this stuff. I said, Jesus, you know, it's like this. They're not doing anything different than I grew up with, right? But now it's doing. You could just call yourselves Mormons instead of Doomer Optimists.
Right. You know, I think some doomer optimists are Mormons, so
yeah, that's cool too. I mean, I love the Mormons. Honestly, I really love them. The Mormons were probably, there's no doubt about it, they were the most helpful people in my own life when I was growing up, and to my mother, who was on our own for a while. I mean, that's where I went to Boy Scouts. I was in the Mormon church. I went to Boy Scouts. I did the Explorer thing. You know, I mean, I have nothing but gratitude.
Yeah.
Seriously, for the Mormon relationships I've had. I have the same thing here. That's what I'm saying. I have Mormon friends here.
Yeah.
Just, you know, it's the same thing. It's just some of their ideas are interesting, you know, and I studied all those ideas and I found all the correlates, you know, just like with even Hinduism and the whole notion of pre-existence. Mormons believe in pre-existence, which is, you know, just another version of reincarnation in a sense. But here, you know, what's interesting about, you know, the fundamental doctrine is that you're here to evolve. Essentially, you're here to become a better human being, so to speak, which is really interesting. Yeah. If they would have left, you know, if they would have left polygamy how it was at the beginning, I would probably be a member right now. Yeah. I get past everything else. I might become quite a great, you know, Mormon in my own right. In fact, you know, but that's another story. I know we need to move on now, but
Yeah.
that was really a pleasure talking with you. You know, it probably started out a bit slow, but like I said, I need practice in this sort of thing. I'm used to just when I get into more of the thoughtful mode. I mean, I'm talking business, most of, you know, technical things with people most of the time. And my wife and I have some great conversations, you know, very deep, you know, as far as where we go and so on. So that's great. But talking to other people and realizing that there's people that you can have a conversation like this with, and that you're both really up to the same things in terms of, you know, you want to see good things happen in this world. And there's no reason why they can't. I mean, let's end it with that. Good things.
Yeah.
Good things. Good things.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this has been great. Let's talk again without a 2-year gap this next time. And
let's do that.
without necessarily the excuse of it being a podcast.
yeah, exactly. It doesn't need to be a podcast. So what is it you're going to actually do with this anyway? Are you going to actually post it or?
Yeah, we'll post it. It'll probably be a few weeks. Yeah, we have this, you know, we do a lot of interviews, so it'll probably be like 4 weeks or so, about a month.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I don't care what you do.
We'll tag you.
You don't even play it. It may not be of really value. You know, somebody could probably pare it down to about 10 minutes or so, you know, of comments.
We don't do any editing. We're very lazy. I mean,
all right.
2 a week, so you know, we're not. This is.
Yeah, I saw you did another one this morning. So I mean, you're a busy man. You're doing a lot of talking as well as working. So good luck to you and yours.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. This has been great.
Right. Take care, Jason.